For those of you who haven't been here before, I don't know, I'm Reverend Rita Foster, and I'm privileged to be a longtime friend of this community. And I always am so pleased to be invited. Except this time, I might say that with a little reservation. Talking about this topic, which is really soul, and as was so beautifully committed in the legend of the Hindus, it is within, can only be found within. And so it's much easier to teach principles and to talk about principles. They're of the intellect and concrete. But working with how do we talk to each other about engaging our soul is much more difficult as it is even for us in our everyday lives. So I have pestered my colleagues all week with trying to find, the right way to do that. So what I know is true for all of us is, as Emma Curtis Hopkins, the great mystic, said, we only know what we teach ourselves. And one of the faculties of the soul is to grab, you know, experiences, ideas, images that feed your soul. So whenever you're, in like now in this talk, you may take one thing from it and not hear anything else. You may take nothing and not hear anything else. But it's the faculty of our soul to engage in an experience and take what we need from that. And so it is a little challenging to deal with that area. And as we take wisdom from our founder, Dr. Ernest Holmes, he says, it seems that man exists for the purpose of self-expression. There appears to be no other reason or excuse for his being. The infinite has already implanted within man the instinctive intuition, which is the spiritual knowledge of good, of himself, of the world around him, and his whole growth results from that inner awakening. So that is true. And we're always privileged to have a good foundation of our principles or any of our religious upbringing and training, because that's the realm from which the soul draws its experience. So, in the kind of material provided, suggested outline for this talk, there is the question that represents the natural and deep curiosity of each of us. So we're going to use that as a sort of starting place. And as we go through, this time together experience, we're going to work from both the third dimension and the fourth dimension where our soul lives. And so if it seems like it's out there, it probably is. So the suggested question, and I'd invite you to just take some time, just pause and go within yourself and listen to this question. And it is a universal question, and see how you experience it. So the question is, what is my reason for being? And as we experience that, often we experience it from our third dimensional mind, our rational mind, which is the one that keeps climbing up and down, digging in the ocean. What our mind usually tries to do is bring out some noble idea or thought or gift we have or something we could be, because our rational mind is linear. It likes to know the answer. And to that question, there is no answer. So, we find that that's the way that we often perceive all questions related to our deeper inner growth. So, if you think about that, We know that the soul does not belong to the intellect. So the question cannot be answered by the intellect, only by the soul. And it's like through all of our study or just our pondering, we can say we know about God. That's our intellect. But can we say we know God? That's our soul. Can we say we know the nature of our being, that we're divine beings, that we're surrounded by an atmosphere that wants us to experience the most of life? But can we say we've experienced it? And so that's what all of this, works toward. When we have curiosity, which is the center theme for this week, curiosity comes from a spark in the kingdom of heaven, and it's maybe called inspiration, maybe called intuition. It usually comes when you're not thinking about anything. You're just kind of pondering, meandering. For a lot of us, it might be when we're gardening, when we're cooking, when we're walking. And it's when our rational mind isn't trying to filter what we know. And so that's usually where our curiosity comes from. And as Dr. Holmes would say in many of the just little short, phrases we always remember, is love points the way and the law makes it possible. So in our foundation, in our science of mind principles, we know how the universe works in its cosmic laws, as its nature in relation to us. And so we know that when love or our intuition or inspiration points the way, the law comes in and does what needs to be done for that to manifest. And so our principles serve us well, as do all principles. As Peggy and I were speaking a little before, I find that the more that I delve deeper, um, more scriptural kinds of messages come to me from my early religious upbringing, whatever anyone's was, because all of the knowledge that our soul's attracted to comes from inspired words, no matter the time, the place, or who said them. And as it's recorded, when Cleopatra had the most sacred library, over 200,000 volumes that had been gathered, and Pergamus burned in one of her furies, there was great wailing, but the books were burned, but the ideas were untouched because they weren't bound to anything that was linear. So there's always a natural tension between our rational mind and our soul. Our soul is nonlinear. So we start to do some fourth dimensional things. It is not rational. It doesn't care whether what it wants for you is convenient for you or hard for you. It knows that it is you, and its interest is in having you experience who you really are to your own delight. As Ernest Holmes said, we're here to express life. And so its tension with our rational mind is our rational mind has a knowledge base only of our experiences, what we might have been formally taught, other people's opinions, and it gets very uncomfortable with not knowing the answer. So if it's something new that your soul wants you to experience, your rational mind reminds you of all the times before that you tried something like that and they did not turn out well. And so that tension is always there. Yet the rational mind, in its connection with law, has a very definite function. When you're headed a direction, all of your skill, your knowledge, knowing where to get something, who to contact, is put into play. But left to its own to talk about questions of life or answer those, it's not extremely helpful. So one of the little things we're going to do back and forth between our dimensions is if you want to just get quiet again and pause and just, close your eyes and just relax within and just ask yourself, do you take the truth about yourself and others and the world from the world of appearances? Or do you take your truth about yourself and others in the world from the spark in the kingdom of heaven? Usually what we find is our rational mind first pops up, always wanting to be the first to answer, that its truth is taken about from the world of appearances, the third dimensional world that's linear, that's based on history. And it finds itself more at a standstill or a pause when you ask yourself if you take the truth about yourself and others and the world around you from the spark in the kingdom of heaven. It kind of pauses and it's like, where's the spark? I don't know where it is. Is it a lesson? Is it a saying or whatever? Because it is only within. And when we begin to really appreciate working with our inner wisdom, we find almost a sense of humor about how inadequate our mind is and how fragile it is when it doesn't know the answer. And so our task is always to reassure it that it doesn't need to know the answer. We're talking about two different things. It's so much appreciated for its rational abilities, but it doesn't help us where we need to go. So we're going to talk about your fourth dimensional faculties. So one thing we know in truth is that God or our creator is omnipresent, present everywhere, within everyone, everything, that it's omnipotent, all powerful. There is nothing that has any power to stand against it. It is all powerful. And it is omniscient, that it knows all things. And so it's the omniscient part that we're going to work with, that omniscience is not an intellectual concept. It's from, if you relate anything back to your scriptural training, it's the Holy Spirit that God will send in my name that will teach you things that you know not and show you things you've not seen before. It's the same from that source. The meaning of my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. My words are higher than your words. My actions are higher than your actions. And so in the meaning of omniscience, as we work with that, that faculty is within us, is part of our makeup to know all things, whether we've been taught them or not, to have the right words and actions be in play to bring about what it is we're manifesting. And so we develop a trust in that faculty, which is not of this dimension. And we learn to rely more on the fourth dimensional part of us, which is the vital part of us that is so alive, that is our divine. And we ask ourselves in doing that, do you trust the world of matter or do you trust the world of spirit? And I know myself too, for all my training, lots of spiritual training, when I sit down and ask myself that, sometimes I'm not so sure. And that's the place, where we want to be. There's also a fourth dimensional faculty we have called vision. Not seeing, with our eyes, our human eyes, but it is the eyes, the vision that sees beyond the eyes. And the great philosopher Hegel, in his research, discovered a truth that we always see towards something before our mind begins to perceive it. So we'll experiment again a little with that. Just close your eyes and get comfortable, and just let come to your mind a person, an object, it doesn't matter, and just see what happens. So was what came to you an image of that person, maybe their face, maybe their object? Okay, there's that vision. And then try it with your upward vision, which doesn't mean you have to raise your eyes up. You don't have to look up, but in your vision, not your human sight, your vision, just sit with that again and just ask yourself again the question of deep questions of what am I? Who am I? And just let your vision just drift upward. Okay, so did a clear picture come to your mind? You did, that's good. If not, if it did, you can help me later. It doesn't always happen for me that way, but that's great. So that's our vision as opposed to our seeing. So in this fourth dimensional aspect of ourselves, what we perceive is that when our vision is downward, it's into the world of appearances. And when our vision is downward, we're seeing everything that's wrong, everything we have to do, everything we are, everything we're not. And it dwells there, roams around there. When our vision is upward, it's disconnected from that. It may not bring any information. It may be only the sensation, which I'll tell you for me is a great realization that visioning upward, my mind didn't do anything. I mean, that to me was enough of a revelation. So it works in that way. So there are some helps we need because what we're working with is experiential. We want to know ourselves inwardly. We want to know the world we live in from an inward perspective. And we want to be in contact with what it is that constitutes our greatest expression, our greatest fulfillment. It is said that, when we say by the grace of God, wherever there is the grace of God, there is fulfillment. So it's living in that sense. So one of the most important to me and helpful and influential things is to have a community, live in a community. And that was my pestering my colleagues in my community. Because if you think about it, if you want to discover more of your inner life and you want to know the questions about soul or God, and you're with your usual associates, or as one philosopher said, we're more like our associations than we are where we're descended from. So if you're sitting with them and you're saying, I'd like to talk about the meaning of my soul, and you can imagine They will believe you're in a different dimension. But we only learn in this experiential dimension from others, from great teaching stories like the legends, from conferring with our colleagues. What do you think about this? I'm confused about this. I have a question about whatever. And when you're in a learning spiritual community, that is a wonderful place for discovery, because not only is it an open and safe place, but oftentimes you know the answer to something that's important to you just by hearing yourself ask the question. Because all that was needed was for you to put forth the question. Nobody tries to answer it, but the point is you've asked it. So my prayer for you would always be that you have this kind of community and place where you can explore those, because it is a joy. It is a real curiosity when you dig within yourself and discover what is there. Oh my gosh, the good things, the other things, but it is a joyful exploration with other people. The other places we experience it are in music, which takes us to another dimension, artwork that does that. Um, I watch athletic things and cultural things I find differently as I've done this, more in appreciation of the individual. And if it's the Super Bowl this afternoon, more in appreciation of what it took for each of those individuals to be there. There certainly was some vision, some passion, lots of hard work, probably times of discouragement, rejection, and yet something within them still strives to be their very best in that moment for themselves, for their team. And that is actually, believe it or not, their soul at the football game. So that will be going on as well. And so that is as much as I can come up with. I would much rather, when they ask me to talk about the principles and the laws and the things that are concrete, because this is, no one can talk to you about, I can talk to you about your soul. No one can ever tell you how your soul works, what it wants for you, except to trust that it is always striving toward your highest good. And if we want to take time after the service and fellowship, we can talk about all these things and ask questions and enjoy that time together. And the one question that we might think about in relation to this tension between your mind and your soul. So, of your mind and your soul, which is creative? Either, both, neither. And all of those are answers of discovery. So to just close with, again, our quote from our founder, Ernest Holmes, there is an irresistible, universal, and divine urge within us to be happy, to be whole, to express the fullness of life. And that is something only our soul in combination with our intellect can do. So if you were going to spend time reading, climbing mountains, going to the ocean, take a walk instead. Take the dog, get some coffee, do something that allows your soul the freedom to just be as it is. And so that is it for me. And